Start by introducing our guest today. As mayor of San Jose from 2015 to 2023, Sam Liccardo's innovative efforts to confront homelessness included pioneering the conversion of motels to housing. He piloted the development of quick-build prefabricated housing communities that were constructed at a fraction of the time and cost of traditional apartments, and also launched a successful program that employs unhoused residents cleaning the city in exchange for housing and pay. In addition, Mr. Liccardo helped rebuild the city of San Jose's police department through the passage of two ballot measures that added more than 200 officers in 4 years, and by expanding a program for unarmed staff to respond to routine calls for service. By the year he left office, San Jose had the lowest homicide rate of any major U.S. city. Sam led the California Big City Mayors Coalition for 2 years, also spearheading efforts by cities to secure unprecedented statewide funding for more rapid homelessness and pandemic response. Mr. Liccardo emphasized investments in preparing San Jose's next generation for the jobs of the future as he helped more than 5,000 East San Jose teens obtain their first jobs, expanded after-school and summer learning for children living in San Jose's least affluent neighborhoods, and provided coding classes to thousands of youths throughout the city's libraries. Prior to Sam's service in elected office, he prosecuted felony crimes of sexual assault and child exploitation in the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office and served as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of California. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School, Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government, and Georgetown University. He and his wife, Jessica Garcia Cole, live in San Jose. We are thrilled to have Sam with us here today. Your bio, I even left out some of the other accomplishments. Great job, Sam, as mayor of San Jose and all the efforts you started. First question, why did you decide to run for Congress?
Thank you, David. Ann Asher has served this community so incredibly well for 32 years. Obviously, these are very big shoes to fill. And when she announced her retirement, I had, at the time I was teaching at Stanford at the law school and frankly enjoying it, enjoying a year away from politics, and had to persuade myself, frankly, that it was worth jumping into a race knowing that this is a very divided Congress and it's very difficult to get much done. I'm running because I persuaded myself after a lot of thinking and really a lot of discussion with my wife, Jessica, that there was a lot that could be accomplished, even in a divided Congress, reaching across the aisle. And I think that we critically need to get Congress focused on the things that matter most to communities like ours, because although our community is very unique, I think we recognize the challenges we face, like a housing crisis, incredibly high cost of living, homelessness, other challenges we're facing, adaptation to climate. These are realities that communities across the country are facing. And I'm convinced that what Congress needs is perhaps a former mayor who appreciates the critical needs of local communities. They're grappling with these challenges so we can refocus Congress on the things that matter most in our local communities and away from perhaps from many of the performative political battles that we see every day in the news.
Thank you. What aspect of your track record as San Jose mayor are you most proud of?
Dave, I guess it would fit into two categories. One is I'm proud of the ways which we work together with stakeholders who may have been on the opposite side of very big battles and brought people together to try to forge solutions and agreements that would enable the city to move forward. I'll give you two quick examples. We had pension reform battles, particularly with the police union and other public employee unions before I got into office that had resulted in a great departure of many employees. We lost more than 1,000 city employees through those very painful times. And certainly I take my responsibility for my own role in all of that. But when I came into office, I had a very clear mandate, which is I had to rebuild a police department that lost nearly 600 officers through pension reform battles and Great Recession and everything else. And we faced a $3.5 billion unfunded liability in our pension retirement accounts. And we had to somehow or another fix that if we were going to have any budget to be able to provide basic city services. And so we negotiated after a very painful mayoral election in which unions spent millions of dollars against me. We sat down at the table, we negotiated with 11 unions, got to an agreement, took that agreement to the voters, and ultimately the workers supported it. Most importantly, of course, with the voters' support, we were able to save taxpayers more than $3 billion over the next 25 years. We're able to realize those savings already. We finally have been able to balance budgets, and I was able to give my successor a $30 million surplus. So I appreciate the hard work that many put into that effort. Similarly with Coyote Valley, some may know who are particularly engaged environmentally, that was a very important priority for us regionally to protect against development in a very environmentally sensitive area just south of San Jose, between San Jose and Morgan Hill, and really working collaboratively with the Peninsula Open Space Trust and with several landowners who are very upset about ideas about stopping development there. We managed to forge an agreement, again, take it to the voters. We worked hard to bring everyone to the table and able to preserve, in that case, more than 1,000 acres that were strategically located that ultimately have resulted in thousands of more acres that are preserved for future generations of open space protection and wildlife corridors, protecting an underground aquifer that is a critical source of water supply for our community and actually for the whole county. And so those are examples I'm proud of where we just were able to bring together folks that don't naturally agree to accomplish something that's really important in the long run. The last thing I'd say is I'm really proud of the work we did really for youth, for the next generation. We worked really hard to fill a lot of gaps that our schools couldn't fill because of challenges in budget. Everything from providing Wi-Fi, free public Wi-Fi to 200,000 residents in collaboration with Eastside Union High School District, to enabling 1,700 first-generation kids to have a pathway to college with micro scholarship programs that I raised money for from the private sector, to opening, in 16 of our poorest neighborhoods after school and summer learning programs. So it's really about the things we did that have the long-term impacts, whether it's on our youth or for the future of our valley.
Thanks, Sam. What efforts were you involved with as part of a regional effort to reduce barriers to job growth and also to increase housing?
Oh boy. Well, certainly I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, that's in the nature of being a large city mayor, and walked the halls of Congress more than once, advocating with leaders in our innovation economy from Los Altos and throughout the county around some critical issues ranging from immigration reform, so we could actually bring the best and brightest from around the world to continue to fuel the innovation of our valley, to better tax treatment of research and development expenses, for example, a whole host of issues. I won't bore you with what we advocated on. I also spent an awful lot of time, obviously, on housing because we share a housing crisis, certainly in our region. And I don't think that's unique just to our region. I think virtually every major metro in the country suffers from that. So I certainly spent time in Washington, Sacramento advocating that space. But in terms of what we did locally, we had a lot of battles we had to deal with. I led an effort called Measure E in 2020 that is generating now between $70 and $90 million a year for affordable housing development and to respond to homelessness. We worked very hard to ultimately resolve with the county of Santa Clara to essentially get out of the way of our efforts to try to build more than 10,000 units in North San Jose, which is critical. It's right along a transit corridor where we critically want housing and we want density in those very limited areas around the transit. And we had worked very hard over several years in order to get the county to let go of some of its claims that would prevent the housing. We increased densities in the downtown and key corridors where we have transit. We reduced fees on high-rise housing. So a lot of things to try to enable more housing to get built in the right areas, right? And smart growth and downtown and in the transit corridors. And then certainly a lot of work on transit generally, because we know that's critically important for improving the traffic challenges of our region. I spent a lot of time in 2020 working in partnership with San Francisco County, San Mateo County, and Santa Clara County to get folks to agree where there was a lot of disagreement about how we could get Measure RR to the ballot. And I'm proud of the work I played that we all did there. And that, of course, is critical for Caltrain electrification improvements. And co-led efforts like Measure B in 2016 that are important for a lot of transit and public transportation improvements in the valley. So I won't bore with all the details, but fair to say I was deeply involved in both housing and transit and transportation issues.
Thanks, Sam. Can you tell us about your opinion about how the recount came about, your role in that, and your opinion of it?
Sure. I suspect there are a lot of opinions. I'd be interested in hearing others as well. So if we had a statewide election and there was either a tied vote, which was extraordinary and remarkable, or a close vote of any kind within some margin, in a statewide election, there would be an automatic recount paid for by the registrar. If we had a countywide election or a vote within Santa Clara County, there would also be a recount automatically paid for by the registrar. We had a unique situation. I guess the state legislature left out what happens when you have an election that spans over two counties that is not statewide. In this case, it's federal. And there's actually no automatic recount, even though that's sort of the standard in, I think, 23 or 24 states in this country. So that leaves it to private parties, either the candidates or some outside party, to go pay for a recount, which I would be the first to say is a terrible way to run an election. I think we all agree that counting votes is a public function and probably should be paid for and handled by a registrar without any external engagement. Nonetheless, there was simply no other option in this case. If anyone wanted a recount, in which in this case we had two candidates who were tied. So we certainly evaluated options internally. We watched carefully as other folks lined up. And we had one gentleman, I guess, a gentleman who I'd never met before, talked to before, named Dan Stegnick in Pacifica, who had come in and proposed that he would somehow request the recount. Then another gentleman who I did know by the name of Jonathan Padilla also did the same. I don't know what conversation they have between them, but Jonathan Padilla ultimately was the one who moved forward. And he undoubtedly raised money from others to do so, because it's very costly to have a recount in this county or in any location. And Jonathan Padilla, to be very clear, is someone I know who was a supporter of mine. He worked for my mayoral campaign 10 years ago. Nonetheless, I had no conversation with Jonathan about this, and nobody on my team did. And I certainly didn't talk to anyone on his team. And I assume he had a team, because I don't expect that Jonathan could have paid for this himself. So I know that he raised money from others, and I assume that he raised money from my own supporters to do it. And I can only assume, without having had any conversation with him about it, that he did it for a mixture of both political motivations as well as motivations that, I think all of us agree that we want a fair count of the ballots. And what we learned in recount after recount in Santa Clara County is more than 90% of the time when you have a recount, you have a different tally. That's just the nature of human error in these counts. So there was a recount and there was a different tally. And obviously, Evan prevailed by 5 votes. I think what's important about all this is while there's no question that Jonathan had political motivations, I would assume, I assume that he operated under the same assumption that most of us would, that it's probably easier to win an election with one opponent than with 2 opponents. I think we don't have to be math majors to figure that out. I certainly don't know who he raised money from beyond what's been publicly reported. I think we know Michael Bloomberg's funds were contributed. I know there will be other reports that'll come out in the next couple months, and I assume they will be other people's who have been associated with me in the past. Nonetheless, under federal law, we are prohibited from having any conversation with any of those folks or communicating with them in any way. And so naturally, the specter appears that somehow or another I've orchestrated it all, which I understand is the natural accusation. These things emerge in campaigns. You may have heard that occasionally candidates get involved in accusing others of doing things. Nonetheless, I'm quite clear that we've been following the law, and we've been following not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law and staying out of it. But I certainly support automatic recounts, not just in this election, but in any election in which the votes are close, because I think it's important for the integrity of elections. And by the way, the Mercury News editorial board agreed with me not once, but I guess 3 times when they criticized my opponent for for making political hay out of this.
Thanks for very detailed, explanation of what actually occurred. Much appreciated. I'll move from one tough question to another. There's been consternation about your not being a resident of the 16th congressional district,
Yeah.
even though you're not legally required to do so. Do you plan to move into the 16th district?
So first, let me tell everybody where I do live. I live in the north side neighborhood of San Jose. I lived here for 17 years. And that is a location that's about 12 blocks outside the district lines. I grew up in the district. I grew up in Saratoga. I've lived in various towns within the district. I spent a couple years in Mountain View and Campbell and Los Gatos, in various apartments in my younger years. So I was, like all folks, looking with roommates to find more affordable housing, and spent more than a quarter century of my life living within the precise confines of the district. And I also worked many times in the district, including last year. As I mentioned, I was teaching at Stanford University for a year. And got my first legal job in Menlo Park, and subsequent legal jobs in Palo Alto. So it's fair to say that I've spent an awful lot of my life in the district, but more importantly, my service as a mayor and as a board chair of everything from the Valley Transportation Authority to Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the Cities Association, a whole host of regional agencies and entities, certainly familiarized me very well with the challenges throughout the entire district, whether I live 12 blocks within the district or 12 blocks outside the district. So I know folks will make hay of it. I get it. It's politics. But Nancy Pelosi and lots of other folks have also lived outside the districts in which they represented. Now, will I move back into the district? My wife and I are considering whether or not to do so for reasons having nothing to do with politics. My parents are both at an age where they need help, and they continue to live in the home that I grew up in. And so we are certainly considering that option, but it wouldn't be for political reasons or anything having to do with this campaign. We're assessing that now, and I can't tell you how that's going to work out. We're still talking to them about their needs and how we can best address their needs at this time. But certainly, I'm open. I simply don't want to make promises I can't fulfill.
Thanks, Sam. How will you keep in touch with what is most important to district voters?
Yeah, that's an important question, because we know the demands in DC pull folks away, and inevitably I think Congresswoman Escher did an incredible job of staying in close contact with many voters. I heard that frequently as I'd walk, knock on doors in Palo Alto and elsewhere. I think what's critical is to provide as many forums as possible for people to engage. Something we did often when I was mayor, using telephone town halls where we could have a lot of people get involved, have a lot of community meetings in the community, at the community centers and libraries and so forth, where people feel comfortable engaging. So folks have as much direct connection as possible. I think it's also critical to have a very focused staff that understands critical role of members of Congress in serving communities. So when folks are struggling with a Social Security check that didn't arrive, or an immigration issue that needs to get worked out, that is a primary function. And we've got to have really good staff. And I think certainly Congresswoman Escher's done that, that are on the ground, deeply engaged, And that their role is not simply to serve the residents, and that's certainly the critical role, but also to engage the member of Congress and directly where the member of Congress needs to get engaged, where you've got to make that call to the federal agency to resolve the dispute over the veterans' benefits, for example. Those are the things that you need to have a great staff that's on the ground, and I need to make it a priority every day in my work. I think I've demonstrated as mayor, I know how to do that as a mayor. You don't have the luxury of simply blaming other people for problems. Every time I showed up at Safeway or at the gym, I heard about every encampment, every burglary, every pothole that folks wanted to bring to my attention. I understand the critical need to be responsive because of my role, obviously, in serving a community of 1 million residents and having to do so really at the retail level of government.
Thank you. Now that it's you versus Evan Lowe, can you highlight some policy differences between the two of you?
Well, I think I would encourage folks to go on my website, samliccardo.com, and you'll see I actually wrote a book on the website to describe a very specific set of ideas about how we could get things accomplished in a divided Congress, because let's face it, it's probably not going to get undivided anytime soon. Regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, there's a decent chance that we're going to have Senate held by one party and a House held by a different party in the next Congress as well. And so what's really important is finding those solutions that we can get accomplished within the context of the divided Congress. And I've been very specific about the ideas that I put forward. I have not seen a very specific set of ideas from my opponent, and so I don't have a great set of contrast to offer. And I think that point was also made by the San Francisco Chronicle and the Mercury News when they issued their editorials, and they noted that I had very specific ideas to address challenges, whether it's around regulation of artificial intelligence or how we're going to address a housing crisis or high utility costs. I have very specific ideas because I think it's critically important for voters to know how I'm going to vote before they know how they're going to vote. And that's very important. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at the very specific proposals I have. What I can say is, at least based on voting record, there's probably some significant contrast. I think folks know that, or some folks may know that I've had some very public battles with PG&E, for example. And I'm proud that, we were able to, in San Jose, work through those battles and launch a community choice energy program that now provides 95% GHG-free electricity to our 1 million residents. That's 8% less in cost than PG&E's base cost. We had lots of battles in 2019 when I led a coalition of 200 elected officials throughout Northern California to essentially take out equity holders at PG&E and convert it to a ratepayer-owned utility. And we actually had the banks lined up to assist us as well. We had very publicized battles with PG&E back in just last year when I led a group called the Fair California Coalition, which is a group of the ARP and some unions and some small businesses and chambers of commerce to battle PG&E around rate increases and transparency. So obviously they're not fond of me. I think there's a contrary voting record with my opponent, and I think that's why PG&E contributed more than $300,000 to a super PAC supporting my opponent in the primary election. So I think there is some contrast there, for example. I think there's probably contrast on some affordable housing issues as well. I was the first mayor in the country to announce an eviction moratorium in San Jose during the pandemic because I think we critically needed to avoid thousands of people being pushed out in the street. I know that upset some of the more powerful groups in the state of California, namely California Apartment Association. And so they also contributed $300,000 in a super PAC to support my opponent in the primary election. And I know there are some votes that he took in the legislature that were clearly aligned with the landlord's interest on that issue. I'm typically considered to be more moderate on most issues, more tech friendly. I'm strongly supported by tech. I don't I don't hide from that fact. I think that's important. I think we need a strong advocate for the innovation economy. I think there is a contrast there. I'm supported by what's called the New Dems caucus in the House. My opponent is supported by the Progressive caucus in the House. And the New Dems are really focused on how we can find solutions that are good for the economy, solutions that we can try to make bipartisan, bringing Republicans in across the aisle to actually get things done. I think that is going to be a critical focus for us in this next Congress, because as I mentioned, we're going to be stuck with a divided Congress, whether we like it or not. And we need to find a way to be able to build coalitions in the middle.
Thanks very much. What can the federal government do about local issues like housing and homelessness in our district, in our area?
That's a great question. I'm going to try to make my answer short because I know my answer has been very long here. But again, if you go to my book, there's 5 chapters. And if you need to get some sleep at night, just start reading and you'll be asleep within a page or two. The 5 chapters are: first, homelessness; second, housing and housing costs; third, other costs of living, everything from insurance to utilities to childcare, a whole host of challenges. There's a chapter on the climate and environment, and a chapter on crime, and we'll be adding other chapters to come. One's coming soon on reproductive rights and other issues. And so, look, I think, we're both Democrats, myself and my opponent. Obviously, we're both going to be on the same page around everything from reproductive rights to voting rights to LGBTQ rights, things like that. But I think it's really important for folks to ask questions about what can you get done in a divided Congress around things that matter to us. And specifically on housing, let me just throw out an idea or two. Right now, we're not seeing any multifamily housing getting built in the Bay Area. The construction costs are way too high. The pro formas don't pencil. Nobody can get financing. Interest rates are high. So nothing's getting built. And this is severely detrimental to us as we think about housing costs and what's going to happen in the next year or two as jobs obviously continue to emerge, and we're going to be faced with skyrocketing rents again, as if they're not already too high. So we've got to find solutions that get housing built, and it's not just true here; it's true throughout the country, where we know we have housing crises in many other metros. What I've proposed is the expansion of what's called a New Markets Tax Credit program, and focusing it on the retrofit of existing office, retail, and hotels. There is a near crisis right now in vacancy in office buildings. You see it in San Francisco, certainly it's more than 40%, San Jose, Oakland, but really across the country, it's actually more than 15% nationally, which is higher than it was even during the Great Recession. So we have an enormous amount of office vacancy from the pandemic and all the other reasons. And we're also seeing a lot of challenges still with malls, retail, as well as hotels, with property owners handing their keys back to the bank. This should be an opportunity for us. Not all those buildings can be converted to housing, let's be clear, but certainly the smaller floor plates can be, the older buildings. And if, a Spur estimated, looking at the office vacancy in San Francisco, which is 26 million square feet, if we could convert just 40% of that to housing, we would have 14,000 apartments and condos in San Francisco. And the advantage of using New Markets tax credits is trying to find a way to make these conversion projects pencil, because they currently don't. It's too expensive, the high construction costs here in the Bay Area and other high cost areas. Now, they are converting them in places like Cincinnati and Kansas City with much lower construction costs, but they're not doing it here because the costs are too high. So the idea is to provide a tax credit that incentivizes the rehabilitation of these older buildings. We can rent restrict a percentage of those units, certainly to ensure that the units are available to people of all incomes. The best thing, well, among many good things, we could actually be doing in the most environmentally sustainable way. We'll be having housing located in center cities, where it is near transit and services, walkable distance to critical locations, and we're not building new buildings anywhere. We won't have the protests in the neighborhoods, right? These are buildings that already exist. And so that means we can waive a lot of requirements and restrictions and make that a condition of the federal grant of tax credits, that local communities have to waive restrictions to enable folks to move faster to convert these buildings. So environmental restrictions, for example, CEQA in California makes it very difficult for many to build housing. Although I'm a strong environmentalist, I believe environment. We know what it's doing right now in terms of housing, despite all the many exceptions. The idea is if we could simply waive CEQA, knowing that this is the most environmentally sustainable way to build housing, let's allow folks to convert these larger buildings in center cities, and not just in big cities, in places like Redwood City, for example, where we know we have vacancy as well. There's a lot of opportunity for conversion. And this will help us reinvigorate a lot of downtowns as well and bring feet back to the sidewalk. So that's one idea. There are many other ideas you'll see in the book. I won't bore you with the details, but I'm happy to go deeper around homelessness or other issues.
Thanks, Sam, and thank you for that great conversation. I'd like to now open the discussion up to the attendees for questions. Please raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you in order the hands being raised. Please remember one question per person and no speeches, please. Scott Hunter.
Thanks, David. Good morning, Sam. Thanks for being here. I spend the majority of my day here in Los Altos, but I am a 30-year resident of San Jose, live in the Santa Teresa area, not far from Coyote Valley that you talked about earlier. And I know in your bio you you mentioned about addressing homelessness, building some tiny homes, and to be honest with you, there weren't a whole lot of those built. And under your reign there, the jungle proliferated, and I think homelessness really got out of hand during that time. And I know that there's been some hands being tied by the courts and such about what happens with the actual homeless folks. And I'd also like you to address that, because you talk a lot about tax credits for builders and building homes and things, and saying, what about the people? How you get them to those homes, rather than, to be honest with you, down into my neighborhood now.
I'm sorry, Scott, could you just say that last bit again? I didn't quite understand.
So you were just talking about how to get more housing built, and certainly more housing is great. More housing means people that may not be able to get to housing have the availability. But you didn't really talk about the people that, the homeless that need those homes. How do we, how do you plan to, to address those folks themselves, not just, giving them a place to live, but, during mental health or any of those issues that really what is driving homelessness, drugs, that type of stuff?
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the question. And there's no question that we struggle mightily with homelessness in San Jose, as does every major city in the country right now. There are 44 cities in this country that have more than 1,000 unhoused people. So it's a crisis everywhere in the country, not just in California. And we've got a lot more work to do. So let me tell you a little bit about what we did and then what I think we can do in Congress. First, what we did is we tried to find every way possible in a Bay Area where it costs $1 million, well, between $900,000 and $1 million per unit to build a typical apartment building. And it takes between 5 and 6 years to get through a process. I think we all know with 10,000 unhoused residents in Santa Clara County, we are not going to solve this problem the traditional way of building housing the same way. So we work mightily to try to find better ways to move more nimbly at lower cost. So we started converting motels, for example, back in 2015. This was like 5 years before the governor made it cool and did it statewide. But we were innovating on this. It worked well, a couple motels. Then we ran out of money. We could only do it for a couple motels until, fortunately, the state made it a program for other cities, and we took advantage of that to convert more. We tried a lot of different ideas, and some didn't work, frankly. Tiny homes didn't work that well. Frankly, they're costly to operate, and if you don't have bathrooms within the units, a lot of people don't want to live in them. They're just not secure and private enough. So what we landed on in 2020 was, I think, a more successful model, which was using prefabricated modular housing. And we typically, we'd find, like Caltrans, we worked out a deal where they'd give us land for $1 a year, and we go build what I call quick build communities. And we did this in the middle of the pandemic when we had really the urgency to try to find locations to move people out of congregate shelters to get them in individualized units so they wouldn't be exposed to the virus. And we found was that we were able to build these communities relatively quickly in 5 or 6 months instead of 5 or 6 years. And we could build them at $80,000 a unit. So we started building these quick build communities in 2020. We found we were able to build 3 of them fairly quickly. We thought we were onto a pretty good idea. And so we expanded it. We were able to build 5 and get a 6 under construction by the time I left in 2022. What we saw, what we were able to do with that is, because we were now able to move people off the street more quickly, we saw street homelessness drop 11% in 2022 in San Jose. When it was increasing the rest of the county, it was increasing the rest of the state. So we thought we were on to something pretty good. Now, that was my last year in office, and my successor, Matt Mahan, I know is trying to drive forward, but the challenge he has is money. And because we're using city money to build all this, and it wasn't just our idea. After we did it, Mountain View started doing it, which was great project. Then Redwood City started doing it. So other cities started following suit, and we thought we were really onto something. The problem is the city can't fund all of these by themselves. It costs us $3 million a year to simply provide the operational costs of providing drug treatment and mental health and all the other things you need to provide in a community like this. And so what ultimately needs to happen at the federal level is we need a federal partner. You can use a Section 8 voucher. Many of you are aware that vouchers are what very low, extremely low income families use to pay rent in a typical apartment. And those vouchers are issued by the federal government. There's not nearly enough of them. But we can use a federal voucher in one of those apartment buildings. It takes 5 or 6 years to build at $1 million a unit. We can't use a federal voucher under the federal statute in any transitional housing or any quick build facility. And so Mountain View, Redwood City, San Jose, we're all strapped because we have to go find our own money to do this. And we weren't even using county money to do it for the most part, not until the end. It was all on the city. And so that's going to constrain our ability to respond. So we need a nimble federal government. We have a mental health crisis. We see it on the streets every day. If you go to San Francisco and San Jose, lots of cities. And right now, there is no private hospital or public hospital in most of the United States that will ever invest in a facility that will provide those services, mental health or drug treatment, for more than 16 residents, because of a historic restriction in the Medicaid law dating back to the 1960s that prevents any Medicaid reimbursement for any facility larger than 16 beds. And there are very modest waivers, but for the most part, those are uncertain. So they're not going to enable anyone to invest in a new facility. So again, what we need to do is to get the federal government, even if we can't get more money, and Lord knows I'd like to get more money, but in a world where we're having a divided Congress, we should at least be able to change the rules to enable the federal government to move more nimbly to support local communities that are struggling with these very weighty challenges.
Thanks very much, Sam. Janine Valadez.
Hi, thank you. Your answers have been pretty awesome so far. I have related back to just housing in general, and then drilling down specifically to the issue of wealth generation. I mean, there is the task of finding the domiciles, the units, and that's enormous, as you've described. But it seems like most of the affordable housing, if not nearly all of it, is rental, which is, still gets people off the street, but it continues all of the gaps that we experience societally, in terms of education, in terms of income. So the question for you is, what are your thoughts on the problem in general? How do we deal with the lack of generational wealth building in our communities? And then also what your thoughts are on community land trusts.
Thank you, Janine. A really important question. We've worked a bit in San Jose to find ways to incentivize community land trust development, which is pretty hard. You need very sophisticated nonprofits. You see a lot of these in places like Boston and New York that are able to really engage, both engage the community and be able to understand housing development, which is not simple, I know. But there's no question community land trusts provide a promising model, but they are limited, obviously, because we know land is so constrained severely in the Bay Area. I certainly support shared equity models, cooperative models, community land trusts, and other ideas where we can get them to launch. The reality, though, is at scale, when we're dealing with a challenge that we're dealing with in this country, with millions and millions of extremely low income residents who are 3/4 of them don't get access to vouchers, even if they qualify. And simply, we have a very severe shortage of supply. I'm sorry, I'm getting calls a lot right now. I'll try to put my phone away. It's really difficult to scale an equity or ownership model given the enormous cost disparities. I think you all know what it costs to own a home in Los Altos. And it's also extremely high to buy in San Jose. Consider the amount of that subsidy that is required to essentially reflect the gap between what someone can pay and what a home would cost. And that gap is so enormous that you realize any public investment quickly dwindles rapidly with a very small number of units. And so I think we need to continue to innovate, particularly with nonprofit communities, nonprofit leaders who are interested in trying different models. And I absolutely support that. But the reality of the affordable housing crisis and how it's affecting millions of communities is fundamentally one of scale, and that requires a focus on rental. And that doesn't mean to the exclusion of equity models. I just think that nobody has proven how we can do this at scale except through rental.
Thanks,
And
Sam.
I think what we need to focus on is other ways in which we can build, help folks build wealth. And obviously, skills are the most important thing we can do. Let's invest in human beings and make sure that every individual has access to the skill building opportunities they need, college or other technical careers.
Thank you. Gary Hedden.
Putting on my Greentown Los Altos hat, and given what you mentioned about the divided Congress, what's feasible in terms of your top priority, environmental priority?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. There's some low-hanging fruit, I think, around our electric grid. I think we critically need to invest billions of dollars into a grid if we're going to be able to electrify and move off of fossil fuels. And right now, for example, we've got a permitting process in this country where 50 individual states, or actually they're more in separate regions, have permitting authority for transmission, which is really bogging down the ability to get electricity transmission infrastructure in place, which is what we're all going to need, particularly as we're seeing more peak usage strain local infrastructure on the grid. And so I'm thinking about bills like the Big Wires Act to essentially streamline the permitting, allow for a federal permit that'll simply enable folks to be able to get infrastructure in place we need for electrification. I think, though, in terms of a bigger impact, I'd like to see us find a way to get the federal government involved in supporting homeowners and apartment owners and small business owners in making clean energy investments on their own properties in the same way that you see federally backed mortgages from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac help tens of millions of homeowners buy their first home. And it's not a completely new idea. I mean, we see, for example, Property Assessed Clean Energy, which it works well in some counties and not in others, but it's in a few places in this country where people are able to put the debt for whatever they invest in, whether it's batteries in a garage or rooftop solar or a heat pump, they put that on the property and they pay it off over 20 years. There's been a lot of criticism of some of those programs because of contractor fraud and high interest rates and things like that. If we were federalizing a Property Assessed Clean Energy program where we enabled every homeowner to be able to finance the cost of the solar array or the batteries or whatever it might be, put that on their property, and then securitize that debt in the same way that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac does to reduce interest rates, to require much greater federal mandates around disclosure to borrowers and homeowners like we do with mortgages today. I think you could see a dramatic improvement in those kinds of programs. And we could see every property owner being much more incentivized to invest in clean energy because it will reduce their utility bills, right? For the same reason that so many of us do. We see that utility bills can come down if we're generating and storing our own energy and using more energy efficient appliances. I just put a heat pump in my home a few months ago, but the cost is way too high for most homeowners. And so I think, look, Republicans represent a lot of homeowners just like Democrats do.
Okay.
And if we can provide a program that says, hey, this isn't about saving the climate, it's about saving homeowners money on stratospheric utility bills, because they got those in Florida just like they do in California, right?
Yeah.
I think we can sell a program that hopefully we can get federally backed financing to help property owners make the investments they need to push us into a greener future.
You know, I really like that answer a lot. We have so much wealth in our homes that could be tapped. We could put heat pump we could heat our homes with heat pump technology right now and get away from the gas, the use of gas.
Yeah, and as you know, mandates don't work well in a lot of parts of this country. So I think providing the incentives is a better path.
Very nice, thank you.
I know some of you may need to leave at 9:30, but before you go, a few announcements. I also wanted to mention that Sam said he could stay for a few minutes, so we'll keep rolling. Because I see there's other people in my queue to ask questions. Our next meeting will be Friday, June 14th. Please join us for a discussion entitled Meet Evan Lowe, candidate for Congress District 16. We hope to start at 8:30 that day, but the time is TBD pending the legislative session schedule. We'll keep everybody updated. If you'd like to be added to the LACC mailing list, please send an email to info@losaltoscommunitycoalition.org. This email is posted in chat for your convenience. A big thank you to the Los Altos Mountain View Community Foundation for providing LACC with financial and in-kind support. Next question is from Grace.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for everything that you mentioned today. One of my major concerns, even with Congresswoman Eshoo, was really reaching out across the aisle. I like what you just said in reframing climate change by saying, how can we save, homeowners or anyone money? And that across the board speaks to everyone. So instead of saying those triggering words like climate change to people who don't believe in it, I think that's one way to reach across the aisle. But how do you envision that? One of the things that Congresswoman Eshoo had mentioned in her town halls was that, she's finding that, Congress is a very different place now, where the Congress people, instead of staying in DC to talk with each other, they go home to their communities, which is a good thing, but that means that they're not talking to each other. You're not talking to your other fellow Congress folks to work things out. So anyway, so that's what I'm interested in. I know it's going to be a really shocking experience to deal with folks, especially when we see things like Marjorie Taylor Greene having a shouting match over somebody's eyelashes at
that was something, wasn't
Congress. That was just astonishing. So how would you be able to reach across the aisle with people who just don't even want to talk to you?
Yeah, thank you, Grace. A very important question, and I know that Congresswoman Eshoo is right about the environment. I actually worked on Capitol Hill as an 18-year-old with a clip-on tie for Norm Mineta back in the day, and many of you fondly remember Norm in the 1980s when we had a speaker, Tip O'Neill, would sit down with a president who was a Republican and hash out issues over immigration, Social Security over a beer. That doesn't happen. And so we have to be really intentional about creating those spaces where we can actually have safe conversations. There is one space where that is happening, but clearly not enough. And that is, there's what's called a problem solver caucus in the House of Representatives. And this is a group of 62 members, equal number of Democrats and Republicans. And it started with some enthusiasm. I think it's wilted a little bit over time, obviously, with the great disparities in just what's going on politically. But the idea is you can only join if you bring a member from the other party in with you. And you're not allowed to talk about whatever your party is telling you have to vote on. You have to talk about solutions. And the idea is to have that generative dialogue where you can start to think about some of those issues that are maybe not on the front page, but still have a very big impact. I mean, we think about the housing crisis, for example, that's afflicting so many communities across the country. It doesn't capture front page news in Congress because from congressional action, because there really hasn't been significant congressional action and in terms of changing policy in probably 2.5 decades. So we, so these are the kinds of issues where we could start to work together on, I think, where you have impacts, or, the utility bill issue I just discussed before, you can have impacts on people's lives. It may not be on Gaza or on the border, which is the hot button issue where everyone's going to be kind of in their corner. So you got to find those issues that are in the interstices that still have impact. And I think that's really what my book's about is look, we know these are really serious issues. Congress is focused on lots of other things. Can we find the space to get a few Republicans on board for something that's pragmatic that they can sell as a tax credit or a tax cut, right? And still get our goals accomplished.
Thanks, everybody, for your attendance. And we will look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks.
Thanks, everybody. Look forward to continuing the conversation in the months ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.